The Millionaire CEO laughed. "Translate this, and I'll give you my salary." The young waitress did it in seconds and changed everything. "Translate this and I will give you my salary this month," Julian Blake said, voice tinged with amused superiority as he held up a thick Chinese-language contract under the warm gold lighting of Harrington Tech Tower's penthouse boardroom. Glasses chimed, laughter echoed from the assembled executives clutching champagne flutes, and the irony of a self-made tech billionaire daring a temporary waitress to decipher an entire document in a foreign script rippled through the air. Camila Reyes, her golden hair swept back neatly and her posture poised, carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres to the far side of the room. She paused when the contract rustled in Julian's hand, her blue-green eyes meeting his for a heartbeat. The room hushed. "Is that supposed to be funny?" she asked, softly, though firmly, her voice carrying across the polished marble floor. Julian raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering in his gaze. "Only if you think it is, miss," he began, voice dripping with feigned condescension, but shifting when his eyes caught the steady resolve in hers. "Reyes," she replied, "Camila Reyes." She set down the tray, hands steady, voice far from the nervous tremor he expected. Julian laughed, the sound rich and mocking. "Camila Reyes," he repeated, lifting a finger in theatrical challenge. "Translate this in 24 hours, and I will hand you my entire monthly salary, $500,000. Now that would be a real trick." A ripple of laughter rolled through the executives. Champagne glasses glimmered in the low light. Some executives hooted, others exchanged amused glances. Julian's posture radiated superiority, the very picture of triumph as he waited for her reaction. Camila inhaled, straightened her shoulders, and walked forward without hesitation. She reached out, her hand brushing the edge of the contract. "I'll try," she said simply. Julian blinked. "Excuse me?" The room stilled again. The smirks started to falter. "I said," Camila repeated, "I'll try. I accept your challenge." For a moment, there was only silence. Then someone chuckled uncertainly. Julian forced a smile, his confidence faltering for just a second as he looked into her eyes. They were not the eyes of someone who merely served drinks. They held experience, pain, and something else he couldn't name. "Well," he said, feigning amusement as he handed over the contract, "good luck. You'll need it." Camila nodded, took the folder with both hands. As she turned to leave, her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper. A memory. An insult. A test. Julian watched her go, her silhouette framed against the night skyline. The laughter picked up again behind him, but he remained still, his smile thinner now. Something about her gaze had unsettled him. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was the beginning of everything. Camila Reyes stepped into the dim silence of her apartment, the door clicking shut behind her with a sound far too final for comfort. The building was old, the kind where pipes hissed in the walls and the neighbors' televisions murmured through the thin drywall. In the pale light that filtered through a dusty window, her shadow stretched across a floor cluttered with second-hand furniture, water-stained bookshelves, and a small, aging desk tucked into a corner. She didn't bother turning on the overhead light. The amber glow of a desk lamp was enough. She hung her serving uniform on the back of the chair, unpinned her golden hair, and let it fall over her shoulders. A moment passed. Then she pulled the contract from her bag and laid it carefully on the desk. Her fingers moved with practiced precision as she opened her battered laptop and woke it from its sluggish sleep. She began taking photos of each page, aligning them with care, her breathing slow and steady. When she finished, she opened her email and typed in a familiar address. Professor Lin Takahashi, a former mentor and one of the few people who still knew who she really was. The subject line read, "Need a second pair of eyes, urgent." She hesitated before hitting send. Then she did. The weight of the day caught up with her. Camila leaned back, closing her eyes for a brief moment. Her mind, however, did not rest. It wandered to another time, another life. Caracas. Her childhood home smelled of paper and ink. Her mother, a high school literature teacher, filled the house with books and poetry and discipline. Camila had always been the quiet one, the reader, the girl who corrected her father's pronunciation of Mandarin characters at the dinner table. She remembered the night she left Venezuela. It was dark, and the train station buzzed with quiet panic. Her mother hugged her tightly, one hand cupping the back of her head as though she could protect her from the world just by holding on. Her voice was low, firm, and trembling. "Don't ever let them take your mind from you," her mother had whispered in Spanish. "Even if they take everything else, your mind is still yours. Remember who you are." Camila opened her eyes again, the memory sitting like a stone in her chest. She glanced at the small photograph framed beside her laptop. Her mother, hair pulled back, eyes kind and steady. It was the only picture she dared keep out in the open. Turning her attention back to the screen, she began to translate. Her eyes darted from line to line, fingers moving swiftly over the keyboard. She was rusty, but the language returned like an old friend, complex, demanding, but not forgotten. As the hours slipped past midnight, she moved into analysis mode. Notes filled a second document, syntax breakdowns, contextual footnotes, and finally red flags. Then she saw it. Buried deep within the contract's third annex was a clause referencing back-end access, written in veiled legalese, cloaked in euphemisms, and embedded in technical jargon that would have escaped even an experienced English-speaking lawyer. It granted near-total, persistent access to user data, system architecture, and encryption libraries. It was more than a business risk. It was a vulnerability that could cripple the entire company and expose millions of users. She sat still, heart pounding. If this had gone unnoticed and signed, Harrington Tech's systems would have been wide open to exploitation. And Julian Blake, cocky, powerful, smug, had waved this document around as a joke. Camila stood, walking to the small window above the sink. She pushed it open and let the cool night air flood in, brushing against her face and lifting the strands of her hair. The city glowed beneath her, vast and unaware. She was just a shadow in one of many windows, invisible, but not powerless. She looked down at her hands, the same ones that had scrubbed dishes and wiped tables, the same hands that had once held a doctorate thesis and a passport she could no longer use. They trembled again, but this time with something sharper. Not rage, not even pride. It was purpose. This was not about money. It had never been. "This isn't a joke," she whispered aloud, her voice barely above a breath. "This is my chance. My only one." Her eyes returned to the contract, the lines of Chinese text now burned into her memory. She would finish the translation. She would annotate it. She would show him, not because she needed his salary, but because she needed to remind herself and the world that she had not disappeared, that she still existed, that her mind was intact, that her name, though unspoken in these corridors of power, still carried meaning. She sat down again, pulled her hair back into a ponytail, and resumed typing. The night was far from over. The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of the Harrington Tech boardroom, casting long shadows across the polished walnut table. The room, filled with senior executives sipping espresso and murmuring about the previous night's celebration, buzzed with the usual air of corporate confidence. The scent of coffee mixed with the sterile sharpness of success. Julian Blake, seated at the head of the table, wore a dark gray suit and an expression that still carried the smugness of his recent victory. He was mid-sentence, casually discussing the company's next steps post-acquisition, when the doors opened. Camila Reyes stepped inside without being announced. She wore the same black skirt and blouse she had worn the night before, but there was no tray in her hands now, Her golden hair was tied back neatly, and in her arms she carried a manila folder. No one spoke as she walked the length of the room. Some recognized her, others simply stared, confused by the quiet determination in her steps. She placed the folder directly in front of Julian. "This is the full translation of the document you gave me," she said, voice steady, "along with my notes on its implications." The silence was instant and absolute. Julian glanced at the folder, then slowly looked up at her. For a moment he seemed uncertain how to respond. A few of the executives shifted in their seats. One of them, Diane Winters, the company's CFO, leaned forward and opened the folder. Her brows furrowed as she skimmed the first page. "Wait, this is flawless," Diane murmured. "Who did this?" "I did," Camilla replied, still standing tall, her voice neither proud nor defensive. "Just honest." Murmurs broke out around the table. Julian's fingers tapped once on the edge of his chair. He stood, reached for the document and scanned it. The annotations were clear, the breakdowns exact, and near the back, highlighted in red, were two critical sections he had never noticed. A creeping quiet fell over the room again as he read. The contract contained a clause, subtle, deeply buried, but with dangerous consequences. It would have given the overseas partner access to a major part of Harrington Tech's data systems, under the guise of technical support. Camilla had not only translated the language, but had explained its implications in simple, unmistakable terms. Julian said nothing. Diane turned to him, her voice lowered. "If this had gone through, we could have been exposed. Camilla just saved us." He looked back up at Camilla, but this time there was something different in his eyes. Not annoyance, not superiority, something quieter, thoughtful. "I appreciate this," he said slowly, uncertainly. Camilla nodded once. "You should have someone review your contracts more carefully in the future," she said. Then, just as calmly as she had arrived, she turned and left the room. The door clicked softly behind her. For several seconds, the room remained frozen. Julian stared at the door, processing what had just happened. The woman he had mocked 12 hours earlier had not only met his challenge, but had uncovered something no one else in the room had noticed. She had done it quickly, accurately, and without asking for anything in return. Something shifted in him then, not dramatically, not instantly, but noticeably. The lines of confidence on his face softened. For the first time in a long while, Julian Blake felt the weight of being wrong. Outside the boardroom, Camilla walked down the hallway without slowing her pace. She knew she had surprised them, but more importantly, she had done something for herself, something no one else in that building could give her. Recognition. Quiet, but real. The door to Julian Blake's office clicked shut, muting the hum of the Harrington Tech headquarters beyond its frosted glass. The space, spacious and immaculately designed, bore all the marks of success: floor-to-ceiling windows, curated art pieces, a sleek leather desk, and shelves lined with awards and bound strategy reports. But this morning, none of it brought Julian the pride it usually did. He sat behind his desk, the document Camilla had submitted earlier now resting open in front of him. He had reviewed it again, alone, and the truth was inescapable. She had not just proven him wrong, she had exposed a gap in his entire operation, and she had done it with calm precision, without asking for anything. When the soft knock came, he straightened slightly. "Come in," he said. Camilla entered with a composed expression, her posture relaxed but watchful. Julian gestured toward the chair across from him. "Have a seat," he said, quieter than usual. She did. There was a pause. He cleared his throat, unsure how to begin. "I wanted to thank you," he started, "and to understand. You're not who I thought you were." Camilla looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "I'm not." Julian hesitated, then leaned forward. "May I ask who you are?" She took a breath, then answered without embellishment. "Camila Reyes. I was born in Caracas. I studied at Stanford. I hold a doctorate in East Asian linguistics. I left academia after my father was arrested during political unrest. My family was targeted. I had to disappear. Not for myself, but to protect them." He said nothing at first. Then, in a tone far softer than she'd ever heard from him, Julian asked, "Why take a job like this?" "Because it kept me invisible," she said, "and that kept them safe." He stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the role he had carelessly cast her into just hours before. A silence stretched between them, not heavy, but full of unspoken things. Julian reached for his drawer and pulled out a checkbook. With a few swift strokes of his pen, he signed a check and placed it on the desk between them. $500,000, he said, as promised. Camila looked at it. Then she looked at him. "I do not want your money," she said. He blinked. "It is yours. You earned it." "I did not do this for a reward," she replied. "I did it to protect something valuable, just like I have been doing for years. And unlike you, I do not need a grand gesture to prove I know my worth." Her words were not cruel. They were simply true. Julian leaned back, quiet again. A long silence followed. He watched her, trying to find the right thing to say and failing. Finally, as she stood to leave, his voice stopped her. "Wait." Camila paused. Julian turned to face the tall mirror near the corner of the room. For a moment, he just stared at his own reflection, the sharp suit, the carefully groomed face, the CEO everyone envied. But he did not see strength. He saw emptiness. "I look in this mirror every day," he said. "But today, I'm asking myself something I never have before." She didn't speak. He looked back at her. "What kind of man have I become?" Camila didn't offer an answer. She did not need to. She simply left the room, leaving the check on the table, untouched. Julian sat in the silence that followed, the question echoing in his chest like a bell. Camilla's new office was tucked into the quieter east wing of Harrington Tech's headquarters, a modest, sunlit space with a view of the city's skyline and a wall already lined with carefully organized books. It had only been a week since the boardroom incident, but in that time, Camila had been quietly offered a temporary consultancy position by the legal department at Julian's suggestion. She hadn't accepted immediately. She had asked questions, requested conditions, and insisted on maintaining control over her hours and her privacy. Julian had agreed without negotiation. On that morning, Camila sat at her desk, typing notes for a crossbencher compliance review, when a knock tapped lightly on her open door. Julian stepped in. He was alone, without his assistant, without the usual entourage of executives or interns buzzing behind him. He carried something wrapped in brown paper, tucked under one arm. There was no grand announcement, no pretense of ceremony, just him. "Good morning," he said. Camila looked up from her screen, composed as always. "Good morning. I will only take a moment," Julian said. "I wanted to bring you something." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he stepped forward and gently placed the package on her desk. She recognized the care with which it was wrapped. This wasn't from a bookstore. It had been handled, protected. Julian peeled back the paper, revealing a worn but beautifully preserved book. The cover was embossed in Spanish, the title unmistakably academic. Her breath caught slightly as she reached for it. "A rare first edition," he said softly. "Published in Caracas, 1987. Linguistic Theories on Indigenous Andean Dialects. I asked a friend in Madrid to track it down. I thought it might interest you." Camila held the book carefully, her fingertips grazing the weathered edge of the spine. It had been a long time since she had touched something from home that wasn't just a memory. There was a quiet in the room that neither tried to fill. "Thank you," she said at last, voice quieter than usual. "This means more than I can explain." Julian gave a nod, but his gaze held her for a moment longer. You deserve to be acknowledged, Camila, not because of what you did last week, but because of who you are every day." She didn't answer, but she did not look away. The moment passed, and Julian turned to leave. As he reached the door, two young associates passed by in the hall. One glanced in and, not realizing Camila's new position, said with casual familiarity, "Hey, is that the server from the party?" Julian stopped. His voice, calm but unmistakably firm, replied before Camila could. "Camelia? No, that's Dr. Camila Reyes," he said without turning. "She's with our international strategy team." The associates paused, murmured awkward apologies, and moved on. Julian continued walking without a glance back. Inside the office, Camila sat perfectly still. The moment was small, a correction, a name, but it landed deeply. She ran her fingers over the cover of the book again, a slow, reverent motion. Her lips curved, not politely, not as a reflex, but as a genuine, unguarded smile. The first one Julian Blake had ever seen from her, and he had not even noticed. 3 months passed, and with each one, the distance between Camila and Julian narrowed, not with dramatic declarations or grand gestures, but through quiet moments in offices, late emails exchanged with mutual respect, and careful conversations that unfolded between deadlines and data. Their latest collaboration had brought them to Sao Paulo. Harrington Tech was negotiating a strategic partnership with a Brazilian fintech company, and Julian had requested Camila's presence specifically to assist with the linguistic nuances of the contract and the cultural dynamics at play. She had agreed under one condition, that she remain part of the negotiation process as an equal, not a translator in the background. Julian had said yes without hesitation. Now, seated across from each other in a minimalist conference room on the 15th floor of a Sao Paulo high-riser, they worked in tandem. Camila translated technical phrases, clarified cultural assumptions, and offered insights that saved both time and potential missteps. Julian listened, truly listened, offering adjustments but never interruptions. Their rhythm had become seamless. After the meeting, as the sun began to dip below the skyline, painting the room in soft orange light, they walked side by side through a local market, at Camila's suggestion. She moved easily through the vibrant stalls, switching between Portuguese and Spanish with casual fluency. Julian followed, watching as she negotiated for a packet of hand-wrapped sweets, and laughed with a vendor who mistook them for a married couple. "I grew up with markets like this," she said as they walked. "The colors, the noise. It feels alive in a way that boardrooms never can." Julian smiled. "You're different here." Camila looked at him, one eyebrow raised. "How so?" "You're freer," he replied. "You let yourself be seen." She turned away, the smile on her lips softening. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe I just feel less invisible here." They reached a quiet park just beyond the market. The wind had picked up, tugging at her hair, loosening the tie until strands flew across her face. Camila reached up to gather it, struggling to keep it from tangling. Without thinking, Julian stepped in behind her. "Here," he said gently, lifting her hair with both hands. "Let me." Camila froze for a breath, then let her arms fall. Julian moved carefully, smoothing her hair back, twisting it into a simple tie and securing it with the elastic she had been holding. His fingers brushed the back of her neck, light, respectful, but present. When he was done, she turned to face him. Their eyes met, and for a moment the noise of the city vanished. "I'm sorry if that was too familiar," Julian said quietly. Camila shook her head. It wasn't. Another silence. Not uncomfortable, but full. "I think about you," he said, the confession barely above a whisper. "More than I expected to." She didn't look away. "I think about you, too." But even as the words settled between them, there was a pause, an invisible wall that neither had yet named. Camila finally looked up at the trees. "But I cannot afford to lose myself in this," she said. "Not now, not again." Julian nodded slowly. "I understand." And he did. They walked back together under the fading light, saying little, but feeling everything. The morning headlines came, not from the press, but from an internal email thread that spiraled out of control before noon. The subject line was innocuous, due diligence follow-up, but the attached file was anything but. Someone had compiled a brief dossier on Camila Reyes, citing her past academic career, her abrupt disappearance from Stanford, and her family's entanglement in Venezuela's political unrest. It did not name names directly, but the implication was clear. Camila had secrets. The leak came from within. By midday, whispers moved through Harrington Tech's corridors. Executives who had recently begun to regard Camila with respect now paused as she passed. Assistants glanced up from their screens. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. The air had shifted. Camila, upon reading the thread forwarded to her by a sympathetic colleague, felt the familiar weight press down again, the weight of being exposed, of having her carefully guarded identity picked apart and misunderstood, not for what it truly was, but for how it could be twisted. She walked directly to Julian's office, bypassing his assistant, and closed the door behind her. He stood as she entered. "I saw it," he said. "I need to know what you're going to do," she replied, voice steady but her eyes sharper than he had ever seen them. "This can't become a story." Julian nodded. "It won't. I've already spoken with legal. We'll handle the leak internally and discreetly." "That's not enough," she said, her voice rising slightly. "If my family is targeted again, if anyone connects the dots publicly, I lose everything. They lose everything." He paused, reading her not just with his ears, but with his entire attention. "Then I will make sure they are protected," he said. Within hours, Julian had contacted a global legal firm with expertise in political asylum and privacy law. He commissioned a private team to ensure Camila's family in Caracas was shielded from any digital surveillance. It was not a grand announcement. He did not broadcast his actions. He simply made them happen. Meanwhile, Camila kept working. She kept showing up to meetings, kept correcting contract language, kept analyzing regional risk reports. But something had changed. Her presence was sharper now, less open, more watchful. Her confidence was intact, but her trust had retreated. The next all-staff town hall arrived at week's end. It was not meant to address the leak, but Julian took the podium with a different intention. He stood in front of the company's senior and mid-level teams, hundreds of employees watching, some in person, others via live stream. He did not mention Camila's name. He did not mention Venezuela. But his words were deliberate. "We've built a company that prides itself on innovation and intelligence," he began. "But none of that matters if we forget integrity. If we allow gossip to shape our understanding of each other, we don't deserve the talent we've been lucky enough to attract." A pause, then, "There are people here who have overcome more than we will ever know, and their past is not a liability, it is proof of their strength. If anyone believes otherwise, they should reconsider whether they belong at Harrington Tech." No names, but every ear heard what needed to be heard. Later that day, as the office emptied out, Julian walked quietly to Camila's door and knocked. She looked up, eyes tired but clear. "Your family is safe," he said. The firm confirmed it. Camila's expression didn't change at first, but her hands, clasped on the desk, loosened. "Thank you," she said. Julian turned to leave, then hesitated. "I wish I could do more." "You did enough," she replied. Then, after a pause, added, "And you did it quietly." That mattered more than she could explain. The storm had not fully passed, but Camila Reyes stood where she had always stood, unbowed, and now she was not alone. The office was quiet, filled with late afternoon light that streamed in through the tall windows, warming the soft beige walls and polished wood shelves. A small orchid bloomed by the corner of Camila Reyes's desk, a subtle reminder of the one Julian had sent months ago, on her first official day as Director of International Relations. She had not asked for a title. She had not needed one. But over the course of the year, through careful, steady work and a handful of difficult, defining choices, she had become an irreplaceable force within the company. Today, she had just closed a complex deal with a Southeast Asian firm, one that required navigating 3 languages, 2 legal systems, and weeks of quiet negotiation. It had been her team who brought it home. Her leadership. Her name on the final memo. There was a knock, soft and familiar. Julian stepped in. He no longer knocked like a CEO. There was no urgency, no assumption of priority, only a quiet respect. "Can I steal 5 minutes?" he asked. Camila nodded, setting her tablet aside. "Only 5. He smiled and stepped forward, holding a box. It was dark wood, smooth and handcrafted, with a small brass clasp. "I had this made for you," he said, placing it gently on her desk. "It's yours to open when you're ready." Camila lifted the lid slowly. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a nameplate, elegant, engraved in brushed gold. It read, "Dr. Camila Reyes, Director of International Relations." Just below it, etched into the wood lining, were the words, "For the one who saw beyond words." Camila stared at it for a long time, her fingers tracing the letters like they might vanish if she blinked. Then she smiled, not the polite smile she offered in meetings, nor the cautious one she gave at polite congratulations, but a real, soft, knowing smile. "Thank you," she said. Julian nodded once, stepping back. "You don't have to use it. I just wanted you to have it, to know that you've always had that title, at least, in my mind." Camila closed the box gently and stood. She walked over to the window, looking out at the city skyline. San Francisco shimmered in the late light, alive and sprawling, a place that once swallowed her whole, now reflecting her back. She remembered the first night, the cold weight of the contract in her hands, the laughter in that boardroom, the taste of humiliation wrapped in resolve. She had entered the building unseen. She would never be invisible again. Julian stood beside her now. He did not speak. He did not try to define the moment. He simply stood there, close enough for her to feel his presence, far enough to let her decide. Camila turned to him. "I remember everything," she said. "So do I," he replied. She reached for his hand, not as a symbol of surrender, but of choice. Her choice. Outside, the wind lifted gently against the windows. Inside, her golden hair caught the light, dancing slightly, as she looked back toward the desk, the closed box, the nameplate, the proof of everything she had become. She had her name back. She had herself. And now she had someone who saw her, fully and quietly, without needing to be told who she was. If this story moved your heart, reminded you of the quiet strength inside us all, or made you believe one